Hello, I'm April Rivero, founder and executive director of the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse, also known as NCAPDA. Welcome to this edition of our Lived Experience interview series that aims to educate and inspire viewers to take action to prevent drug dependence, substance use disorder, and overdose deaths. The topic of our conversation today is benzodiazepines, a type of prescribed medication that's often used to treat anxiety, panic attacks, insomnia, and other conditions. According to my research, benzodiazepines are among the 10 most commonly prescribed psychotropic medications in the United States. Between 2015 and 16, at least 25.3 million people, or 10.4% of adults in our country, were prescribed them. We are seeing a significant increase of prescribing rate among primary care physicians, and the number of hospital outpatient medical visits has also increased, which is concerning. Today, we welcome Melissa, who will be sharing her personal experience in having been prescribed benzodiazepines for a sleep disorder and the dependence and recovery from them that followed. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today and for your powerful story and perspectives. I'd like to introduce and thank our two NCAPDA Youth Ambassadors, Ankita and Karthik, for conducting our interview today with Melissa. If you would please continue watching for a minute after the interview is over, we would like to share some important resources that we encourage you to check out. And with that, I turn this interview over to our Youth Ambassadors.
Hi, Melissa. I just want to thank you again for doing this with us and dedicating your time to this important cause. Well, the first question that I have for you today is, can you explain for those who don't know what exactly is a benzodiazepine, also known as a benzo, and some examples of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the very first one was Librium, but Valium is the most commonly known one. The Rolling Stones called them the mother's little helper. So Valium is well known, but I think the two most common are Xanax and Klonopin. They all are very similar in the action on the brain. The difference is the potency and how quickly they exit the body, which is what they call the half-life. So the whole family is in a family of drugs that are called sedatives or anxiolytics. So you have, if you imagine the energy center of the brain, where all of the neurotransmitters are going in, it just calms everything down, shuts everything down without any kind of selectivity. So that's why insomnia, it's great for insomnia. People are having panic attacks, it cuts it right down. And I think some of the newest ones, Ativan, should also be mentioned. Those are some of the most potent, and they're very highly addictive because of how quickly they exit the body.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Karthik.
So I was just wondering if you could explain what's the difference between dependency and addiction?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love that you asked that question because I asked that question of myself, when I was going through it. And I think it's a very powerful and very gray area for a lot of people. I was thinking about it before we started talking because when I grew up, I thought of addicts as people who used drugs recreationally to the extreme, and then became addicted, but they kept doing so because they wanted to get that high. They were chasing a high, they were trying to escape their lives for some reason. And for me, I had a real, as much as I tried not to, I had a real judgment about that. And I think a lot of people do, this speaks to the stigma, as though there's some sort of moral compass gone wrong, or they're weak somehow. And the national dialogue has kind of shifted somewhat, and now there's also belief that it is an illness, that can be somewhat genetically based, or at least be influenced by genetics. So that's sort of addiction and some of the history of addiction and our perspectives. But dependency, it's tricky because I think people can perceive that there's a physical dependency, which is what I experienced, and that is that you have, for me, for example, I found that if I didn't take the dose that I was prescribed, I would suffer very severe withdrawal symptoms. So severe, and I've heard this happen. Sometimes people will be taking benzos and they run out and they don't realize that they're physically dependent, and all of a sudden they have flu-like symptoms or muscle cramping, or they can't focus their eyes or they can't breathe. That is a physiological dependency that is solely based on the medicine. And then there may be psychological dependencies that come about as a part of that, and that's where it gets a little gray. Sometimes people are emotionally dependent upon them. But I think for benzodiazepines in particular, there is a real strong division, because people can be very strongly dependent without any of the emotional connection, without any desire to get any kind of high, and really want to get off with all of their heart and soul, and not be able to, which was what I experienced for, gosh, almost a year. So I hope that helps, but it's something that I think what I want to add is that it's a dialogue that I think we need to continue to have, because there is so much shame that's around addiction that really doesn't support people getting off, and that flows into people who are truly dependent feel some of that shame. And so both of those need to be addressed with a lot of kindness and generosity as we have the dialogue. So yeah, great question.
Yeah, and Melissa, I just say that this pertains, that stigma and perception really appears within the medical community as well as the general population, which makes it that much more difficult, I think, for the Benzo story. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
Continuing the conversation of dependency and yourself, how exactly did your dependence on benzodiazepines begin?
So with my second pregnancy, I had a late pregnancy, meaning I was considered high risk. So there are a lot of things that can happen with the body. And I stopped sleeping with my pregnancy with my second child. And they were aware that there was something happening physiologically, but they couldn't really do anything to treat it in the initial stages. So after I gave birth to my daughter, I've been on Ambien, which is very similar. It's called a Z drug. It's very similar in where it attaches in the brain, but it's not quite a benzo. But it has very it the brain in similar ways. So I was on Ambien during the late stages of my pregnancy, and then I just cold turkeyed, which the first thing is you're not at all supposed to do that, and I was not informed of that at all. And so 2 months later, as a mother to two infants, I was having terrible insomnia. I mean, like maybe sleeping 2 hours a night, and having two infants, trying to kind of keep a part-time editorial business going. And so I went to see a doctor who was an MD, but specializing in wellness medicine. So he advocated looking at the root cause and, a lot of Eastern medical practices. And he said to me, your adrenals, there's a problem, but you've got to sleep or you're going to have a psychotic break. I want you to take these sedatives. They're not addictive, maybe as addictive as coffee, and you will sleep. And then we'll get your adrenals, figured out. So 2 months in, I'm not sleeping again. I went to see him. He said, oh, we're really going to focus on those adrenals. Let's just double your dose. And what happens is very rapidly, there's this cognitive decline that starts to happen, and a level of desperation when you've gone through, I even looked at a site of what they consider severe sleep deprivation when they're interrogating, you know, when we had the early interrogation techniques that were not considered okay by the international community. 32 hours without sleep was considered, you know, severe criminal sleep deprivation. And I was going days without sleeping. And so my ability to make proper judgments about my own self-care, how to take care of my children was severely, you know, impacted. So when my let's double it, I said, if you say so, if it will help me sleep, I'll do whatever you say. And he doubled my dose twice within the space of 6 months, from 2 milligrams of Ativan to 6, which I know now is a very, very high dose. And I'm a small person. So it's shocking to me now that I got up so high, but we know now that with benzodiazepines in particular, they are not listed in any of the medical literature as medicines that should be used long-term, meaning anything past 4 weeks. Really 2 weeks is what they advocate for. So 6 months, a year on a very high dose is just a bad idea, but it happens all the time. It happens outside of the what is recommended in the literature all the time. So at 6 months, I was desperately dependent and had no idea.
Keto, how is benzo addiction and dependency different from opioid addiction and dependency? And is it possible if you can describe some of the physical and emotional impacts you had while you were using benzos?
Yeah. So I'll just start with the physical and emotional impacts. I mean, I think the first thing that I'll say is it's helpful to know that at the outset, I was a very healthy, physically, emotionally. I was a healthy person in all of those respects. I had a career as a journalist. I had 2 children. I was married. I was very happy. And I was also a yoga practitioner. I was, you know, a like hardcore rock climber. So I was very physically fit and emotionally stable, you know, all of those things. So, so for me, what happened was this really rapid decline physically. Like I'd never like had a problem with my weight. You know, there were times where I was like, oh, it'd be nice to, you know, lose a few pounds, but I had never been someone who in the space of 6 months lost 15% of my body weight. I had friends asking if I had a sudden eating disorder because I was so thin and could not eat. So I was having muscle seizures when I would try to eat. I was unable to walk across a room, Karthik, in one line. I could not walk across a room without running into something or somebody. And I kept thinking, wow, being a new mom is just crazy hard, you know? I mean, I'm running into stuff, I've got bruises all over, I keep tripping. I couldn't remember anything from one day to the next. And I started having, then, you know, and my insomnia came back with a vengeance. And I thought, okay, this is just being a mom. Like it's horrible and I've just got to gut it out. But I think I would say there were muscle tics that started. As a writer, I would write every day in my journal and I noticed that I was starting to be unable to write or focus on my, I had never really experienced anxiety, but I would go to the grocery store and I remember I couldn't look. Like, I remember this one time I had asked this guy behind the deli counter for a pound of meat or something. And he handed it to me and he was holding it in the air because he wanted to look me in the eye and say, you know, thank you. And I couldn't even look at him. I had this hypersensitivity to light and to sounds that I just couldn't fathom what was happening. So, those were some of the just physical effects, you know, and it's so, it comes on so quickly and is so confusing that what happens is there's a degree of denial. And then there's also sort of this attempt to brush it away, or maybe think, you know, maybe this is the beginning of MS. Maybe I've got a brain tumor. Maybe I've got some kind of neurological disorder that I should check into, and then sort of, no, I'm blowing this out of proportion. So, yeah. And ask me the second part of the question again, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
I think it was the difference of benzodependency and
Yeah.
opioid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the two main differences that I would explain are the duration that can happen. It certainly doesn't happen with everyone. I know that that's one of the tricky parts, is that some people can go on for a short time and go off and not have any problem. But it's estimated that about 30% of people who go on will have some difficulty depending on the duration of time that they're on the benzos. And what can happen is you can have protracted withdrawals. So if you go into a treatment center with opioid dependency or addiction, you can safely get off and I think feel physically as though you're not suffering withdrawals after about a week. Am I right about that, April?
Yeah.
About a week. And I think with most other medications, it's about that. You would say a week to a month is sort of max what you would expect in terms of suffering withdrawal symptoms. For benzos, it can go on. For me, it went on for it went on for about 16 months of active. When I started actively withdrawing, it was about a year of active every single day, having, you know, muscle cramps, spasms, feeling like I had the flu, not being able to breathe, feeling like there was fire ants swarming my skin, not being able to look in the eye, not being able to, my husband would watch The Walking Dead, which I thought was really kind of appropriate, on his computer, and I couldn't even listen to the sound or look at the light on the computer. It was too much for me, and this went on for 16 months. So the duration and the fact that sometimes people never recover. People can have withdrawal symptoms for the rest of their life to some degree. That's the part that's really scary.
Continuing after those withdrawal symptoms that you had and the impacts, how did you recover? What was that process like? And what were some barriers and obstacles that you faced during that time?
That is such a good question, because so many people are asking that right now. I mean, I get emails all the time saying, how did you get off? I've been to my doctor and they've said it should take a week, or they've said you can go to this rehab center and it will take a month. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. There has not been a lot of research on benzodiazepine withdrawal and how people can be supported in that process in a way that really allows their brain. The phrase that I've heard used by a lot of the main researchers are your brain coming back online. So there's a doctor named Dr. Heather Ashton, and she died very, very recently. And I just thank heaven for the fact that she did about 30 years of research on benzodiazepine withdrawal. Heather Ashton and Malcolm Lader, they're both out of the UK. And she wrote a manual that is available online. I think it's been translated into 12 different languages. She wrote it, you know, with no book, no expectation of, you know, any financial reward. She just saw that so many people had no idea how to do this safely, because there are no, for a year-long withdrawal, if you're looking at something that could take a year or longer, there are no insurance companies that are going to cover that. If you lose your job, how are you going to manage that? For me, having 2 children, there are so many life questions of how to get off. So, let me see, I hope I'm addressing your question. There's so many things that come up. So if you need to nudge me, please do. But what I found was I started with a doctor that was open to working with me in using the Ashton Manual. That's the first thing that I would say, because it really is considered the Bible of the kind of research that is being done on how to withdraw safely. So I worked for 4 months with this doctor. She's an internist, incredibly kind. And after 4 months of going down and up and down and up, she finally said to me, I don't know how to get you off these safely. I had had a stroke. I had seizures almost every day at night. It was extreme to the point that I was becoming disabled. So she started searching her network, and it was a real education for her. I mean, this is a very well-educated doctor, but she said, I have no idea for a doctor to say, I cannot figure out how to get you off these drugs. They are so entrenched in your brain. We cannot safely get you off. So we found someone who was considered one of 2 addictionologists in my area, which meant he'd studied specifically addiction medicine. And he and I worked together in conjunction with this other doctor to safely titrate me off these drugs. And it took a year. And I had to create an entire kind of rehabilitation program that I could make sure my children were taken care of. And luckily I had a husband who could pay the bills. I didn't have to contend with working a job, but it's something that is in serious need of overhaul, or of not even overhaul, in serious need of addressing in this country. The UK has done some work with trying to provide treatment centers for people specific to benzos, but in the US, we have not even approached it.
Can you explain just like a little bit of what exactly titrating is and how that process works?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. You see the language, I'm so like immersed in it now. I forget that people don't know. So titrating, what they find is that these drugs, I think of them as like stoplights on all of the neurotransmitter traffic in your brain. So if you pull like the central control that has the stoplight and all the lights are going green, it's gonna have this like crazy effect. So you have to very, very slowly, you can't just stop. Like when I found out that it was the benzos that were causing all of my symptoms, I thought, okay, if I could just like pour these suckers into a bag and, bring them safely to one of the dispensaries and never take them again, I would do that. But I knew that I could potentially die. I could very easily have a fatal seizure. So you have to, depending on what works for you, they recommend, and this is out of the Ashton Manual, and I just have to do a disclaimer that I'm not advocating any sort of medical advice. What I did was titrate 10%. I switched over to Valium because Valium has the longest half-life, so the withdrawals would be less severe. And I would drop 10% of my dose, and then I would hold at that dose for 2 weeks until I stabilized. And stabilization meant that I felt like I could function well enough without severe side effects. And at that point, I would drop my dose 10% again. And there were 2 times that I didn't stabilize after 2 weeks. So I would have to hold another 2 weeks and see if my brain had stabilized. It does get to the point, I know that Lisa Ling, who's a CNN correspondent, recently did kind of a expose on benzos, and they show a woman, the last 5 milligrams can be very hard, or it can be so hard for people that they do a liquid titration and they titrate microliters. So sometimes you have to go so slow, it can take people a year to get off a tiny, tiny dose. So it's very individualized, and every person has to see what their body can manage which is very, very different, I think, than any other drug withdrawal.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
So, is it possible if you can expand on how did you find your strength to escape your benzo dependence with everything stacked against you?
Oh my gosh, I know. I think I've said that I had ABC World News come and interview me, and the correspondent kept asking me this question. And that's really, I think, it's one of the questions that is very hard to answer, because I can certainly point to external factors, right? I had 2 young children. My oldest has Down syndrome, so there was obviously a lot of love and care for them and wanting to be there for them, but it wasn't exclusively that. There was, I think there was an inner defiance in me that rose up, that I really sort of made the decision that I was going to get off of these, and I think I was so, the defiance was fed by the fact that I was so shocked that the medical community that I had trusted was so unaware that something could be so radically harmful. And I wanted to be able to make sure no one else suffered in this way. I wanted to be a voice that could help people and help educate both providers, you know, and the people and that they're treating. So I was mad. It helped a lot.
Specifically talking just about withdrawals, how are the withdrawal symptoms of a benzodiazepine different from other stuff like a stimulant or an opioid?
I will speak to what I experienced, because I am not super familiar with withdrawal symptoms for opioids and stimulants. So, I mean, I would guess there are some things that are the same. I think what may be different is that because benzodiazepines act so specifically on the neurotransmitter activity in the brain, the body systems that are impacted are very, very wide. So your muscles, your digestion, your emotions, your like limbic system, you know, I would go into these rages, and I wasn't like a rageful person, and I would have to, I called it walking the benzo dogs. I would know that it was just the fact that I was in withdrawals. And so I would go on this long walk, and I would just be like, just enraged and emotionally really like all over the place. It felt like my emotional reservoir was like at 0. And I think people experience a lot of really bizarre symptoms. Like I would hear these loud booms sometimes. I would feel like my eyes would shake in their sockets. I would hear a ringing in my ears, especially the like fire in the skin stuff, and the hypersensitivity. I think it's the thing that makes it so hard to pinpoint is that they're so, it impacts so many systems, and not one person has the same withdrawal symptoms as another. So it's like you get all that and the bag of chips. This withdrawal, which is, I'm being funny, it's awful, but it's, yeah, it's just radically varied. And from day to day too, I would say.
So, adding on, what do you think people should do who are trying to get off benzos?
Well, I love this question because, of course, that was like that's the big question, right? We don't have a system yet that can support people. So I remember sitting down with my husband after I had gotten really clear. I had talked with a therapist that I had been working with, and he had said to me, Melissa, I want you to realize what you're going to go through is far worse than heroin. He said, it's not even in the same ballpark. And he said, you are going to have to figure out how to work it with your family, because this isn't going to be a month, it's not going to be 2 months, this could be a year, it could be longer. So I think there is a reckoning that has to happen of the timeline. I encourage people to get as much support as they can from people that truly, truly love them. And you get very clear about those that really, really can support you. So get your support system, figure out the places that are, if you have a job, you have to take into account what the stressors are around you and how to work with that. If you have children, you have to figure out how to make sure, maybe bring in family members or friends that can help support, take care of them. And then the most important thing is to get a very, very well-educated medical provider that will work with you using the Ashton Manual or something similar, and really, really is willing to let you go at the pace that that will work for you, for that person, because it's very, very different for each person.
I would just want to add to, and maybe you can give your perspective on this. I know some people get kind of sucked into some of these treatment facilities that claim they can work with people that have a benzo problem, but in effect, they're using the same model as they use for opioid detox and treatment. And that means rapid, right? To stay with that insurance time frame that you mentioned could be an issue. So do you have any extra words to support that statement or that concern?
Oh my gosh. What happens there is that they can actually get off and sort of be, I wouldn't say stable. They're with the withdrawal programs, really they just want to make sure that you are not going to have a fatal seizure or be at the point of committing suicide or having a psychotic break. Unfortunately, these do not work with the way the brain is able to heal itself. The GABA receptors in the brain, and those are the receptors that are really impacted by benzodiazepines, it's part of the central nervous system, so they take a long time to repair. And if you do it really fast, it can actually make it harder, and the withdrawal symptoms can go on longer and longer. So there's this false sense of, oh, I'm done, I should be okay. Why am I still having such severe withdrawal symptoms? So it's not something that I have seen work. And I think it's a model that doesn't support people in benzo withdrawal.
Well, and just to make sure people don't get sucked in and pay thousands and thousands of dollars for recovery for a program that is probably not going to be helpful, we need to have people be aware of that. Do your research, do your homework. Make sure that they don't have a program where they claim they can do this in a week. Let's just say at the extreme, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. And even if it's a week where, you're getting a lot of emotional support, that's great. But this is something that really is very, very long-term. And there's just, I wrote an article for an organization, for a website called Mad in America, and I said there's no duct tape for benzo withdrawal. And what I meant by that is that there is no quick fix. And you really have to be aware of that. If some people it's easier and then they'll be lucky, but I think you really have to have that reckoning that there is not going to be a treatment center that really can support it. So thank you for saying that, April.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On top of that, what residual problems from taking the benzodiazepines are you still dealing with today, if there are any?
I think there are two things that I'll say about that. Three things. One, I'm extremely lucky, which is why I'm speaking out with so much vigor, because I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I don't have a lot of residual. What I do have is a nervous system. For example, I'll say a lot of people can go to a loud concert, pre-COVID. You could go to a concert where there's a lot of music and there's a lot of activity and it's super fun, you know, and it's very loud, and you come home and you can go straight to sleep. That is something that at this point, for me, my nervous system could not handle the impact of all the stimulation. I have a residual hypersensitivity that I don't think will ever go away. So I have to constantly monitor how much input, whether good or bad. You know, concert, I could be like full of joy and listening to the music and it's great. And I get home and I will be shaking or nauseous. It will impact my nervous system in ways that are very, you know, and then I probably, you know, won't sleep. Like I've had friends that have said, well, why can't you go out now? Like, let's go out, let's do something fun. And I'll say, I can't go out. I mean, I have to be in bed by like 9:30 or 10 or my nervous system will start really kicking up and I'll suffer. So that's the other thing. The other thing that I wanted to say is that it may appear as though there's a real happy ending on my side, and there is, but I never did get down to 0.0. I got to 5 milligrams of Valium. I've heard that it's very, very hard to get off the last 5. What happened at that point was my life, my son, who I've said has Down syndrome, they had been in a daycare, and they informed us that they just couldn't provide what he needed. So I had to come back and be a full-time mom, and there were a lot of stressors around my marriage at that point, which is very much to be expected. And I found as I was titrating that I was having extreme withdrawal problems. So I have never gotten to the point of being completely off. I'm very stable. And in talking with a lot of addictionologists, they say, you know, your brain may have adapted so much that you might never get to the point of being able to be completely off. But I've accepted that. I think I'm a single mom now, so the thought of going back into, you know, torrid benzo withdrawal is terrifying to me. So it's something that I accept, but I'm also aware that that might have its impacts, but yeah.
And the stigma associated with substance use and mental health disorders.
So you asked, sorry, you were a little, I didn't get your audio at first. What is the stigma, or?
Yeah, the stigma associated with substance use and mental health disorders.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, like I had talked about earlier, I had my own stigma, which I was unaware of because I had taught writing in substance abuse facilities as a treatment. And, you know, so I had felt very pulled to help people in addiction treatment centers. And then I became someone who felt like I was being judged as being an addict. So I had to kind of contend with the stigma that I was carrying around, which was that people had chosen this, which in some cases is true. But I realized that there's a real lack of compassion. And that makes it really easy to put people in an other category or a lesser. There's something wrong with them. They're trying to escape their lives. And in doing so, you can't really be of help. You're making them lesser. And I think, you know, some people are truly addicts in the sense of looking to it for recreation. But a lot of times that line is really gray. And if we don't really just have full compassion, then we're missing the mark. And the stigma only keeps people from talking about it. It keeps people from seeking help. And it really is a divider that I think is very detrimental nationally. Well, internationally, I would say, just as a species.
Going off of that, what advice do you have for adolescents regarding benzodiazepines who might want to use them recreationally or to even self-medicate if they are dealing with anxiety or mental health issues, or even think that it's just a chill pill?
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, obviously, based on this interview, it is never just a chill pill. Any kind of party drug, that kind of casual nature, you really are messing with brain structures that you could permanently damage. So I would just caution and educate and say, especially, they're the two things that you presented, the sort of using it as a party drug, and then people who may have anxiety and think, oh my gosh, why wouldn't I use this? It makes, I take it and boom, it's super effective. But as a drug, it's very potent, but it's not meant to be used long-term. All of the studies say that. There's not one study that says it's okay long-term. So I would say to be very, very aware of how powerful it is. And in a party situation, I would just completely stay away. Mm-hmm. There's so many ways to find joy and silliness and altered states, and messing with drugs that we really don't know a lot about, to be honest, is just a recipe for disaster. And for those with anxiety, there's so many other ways. I had been a yoga practitioner and a meditator, and I've found those things to be invaluable while I was going through withdrawal. So there are lots and lots of things you can do to help, soothe your nervous system, really.
And I would just want to tag on too, for parents, especially that may be watching this video, that now you know how important it is to lock up your medications.
Oh my gosh.
Xanax is very widely prescribed. So if you have it in your medicine cabinet, get it out of there. Make sure that you lock it up and that your kids can't get to it. And other adults that might be looking for it too, right?
Right. I will note, as a side note, I didn't put this in my book, but I had, when I was in my withdrawal, I remember, we had some folks that would come once a month to help do cleaning around the house, because I really was disabled. I'd wander around the house knocking into things, and they came twice, and I noticed that I was so specific about my dosage because I was titrating. They had taken my medication, and I had not even thought to lock it up. But one of them was a young man who was probably in his early 20s. So
yeah, not surprising.
Yeah.
The other thing would be to properly dispose of them at a disposal site. All communities have them in pretty close order. So
yeah, absolutely essential. Yeah.
So what concerns should those who buy Xanax or other drugs off the street have?
Oh my gosh. Well, anything off the street. The concerns that I have are, first of all, any kind of like new manufacturing of new drugs. I've heard they're doing some black market that are 10 times more potent than what are controlled in a lab. And if you don't know what you're getting, you could so easily go into respiratory distress and failure. It's just, buying something off the streets or in the black market is an absolute potential for death. I can't speak against it enough, and also creating a further market. For people to manufacture, it's just extremely dangerous.
And Melissa, just especially with Xanax right now, we're definitely hearing about fake Xanax pills showing up on the street that are laced with fentanyl. They're either pure fentanyl or they're laced with it. So people that are seeking Xanax in particular need to be aware of that. Potential disaster waiting to happen. Just a little speck of fentanyl can take your life.
Right. They're a dangerous drug anyway that need to be really, controlled and taken with a lot of caution, and to, get something that you don't even know what's in it is just, yeah.
I know April touched on this a little bit, but what advice do you have for parents and teachers and other adults regarding benzodiazepines?
It's funny because I think about this. My kids are now 10 and 12, and I think about how I'm going to speak to my daughter predominantly. My son has Down syndrome, so he's I don't have to worry about him really, but how I'm going to speak to her about this, and part of it is, first of all, educating yourself, knowing that the broad medical community, especially primary care providers, do not know, and we can't necessarily expect them to know what all of the drugs do. There's so many that come out. They're pushed by the insurance companies oftentimes, and they just don't necessarily know what the long-term repercussions are. So to really educate the kids, to be aware of what their kids are doing, who they're hanging out with. I mean, I think helicopter parenting is not a good idea, but communicating and being in touch really with your kids and what they're going through, and really being educated and know what they're doing and who they're hanging out with, I think is essential. And I think the school district being able to teach the teachers what to look for if there's an issue. So because they might not be able to identify it. I mean, I think had I not gone through it, I wouldn't have been able to identify if there's an issue with anxiety or people, some of the things that might show there's a problem.
And Melissa, I just want to tag onto that again. Another really key educational point is the multiplier effect. So my son actually passed away from Xanax mixed with an opioid and a little bit of alcohol. So as you start to combine these central nervous system depressants like that, and Xanax would be a key one that, again, our youth are sometimes experimenting with. They need to know, do not mix it. First of all, don't take it, but if you do not mix it with alcohol. Don't mix it with any opioid that might be out there. So it can be absolutely deadly. We've experienced that. Firsthand.
Yeah, and parties in particular can be really dangerous because you have the disinhibition of the alcohol, and so people are like, oh sure, I'll take something. And if there's not a real awareness prior to going to a party, if there's not sort of that like, oh wait a minute, no way, then you might be inclined. So I think early education is essential. Yeah.
I think April always mentions this, but speaking to adults who like have a glass of wine then take a prescription drug, that can be not a good combination at all.
Absolutely. Yeah, and adults often don't know as well. I mean, we're just at the forefront, I think, of understanding what opioids can do. I'm now really nationally having an understanding, and we are about 10 years behind in understanding what benzodiazepines can do, and especially with the, April just said, the polydrugging,
So what changes do you think need to take place to prevent this growing national problem?
Well, awareness, number one, which is why I'm talking to all of you. Awareness is huge, and the awareness of how many people are going in and getting prescriptions, how many are getting long-term prescriptions. I would like to see black box warnings, and I would like to see a much more vigorous database of that is accessible to doctors that will really note where, and it's more vigorous in some counties and some states than in others, but I think there needs to be like across the board a statewide monitoring. So, doctors know if the patient has come in and if they, first of all, of course, if they're doctor shopping, but even if they're not, that they're not taking it long-term, there needs to be a real awareness of long-term prescribing.
And much like opioids, I think that we need to get to a place where we've got informed consent going on with the doctors. So that's another policy change in addition to those things you mentioned that I'd like to see us work on. So we're going to examine further down path with you, in fact, Melissa. So,
right. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Yeah. If I had been told that these were highly addictive in the space potentially of a week, I mean, I would have said absolutely not. Let's find something else. So it would have changed my life.
Talking more about you, how are you yourself advocating for those who are suffering from benzodiazepine addiction or dependency?
So what I decided was that as a writer, of course, I wanted to write about my experience. And I decided that to write it as a personal narrative, because I think it's so easy for people to view addiction as something that's not going to happen to them or something outside of them. So they're either interested in it because someone they know has experienced it, or they think it's not going to happen to them. So I wanted to write a narrative that would bring you in without thinking that it was an addiction narrative. So that was the first thing. I wanted to give people kind of the experience inside my head of what it was like, and have it be kind of an every person experience. From that, I hope to, and this is a book that I'm working towards publishing now. From that, I hope to be able to talk to people, talk to schools, talk to organizations. I've spoken up at the local university, and I would love to talk to incoming medical students. Really, wherever I can get a foothold in, I will, because education is going to be the cornerstone, and really changing the language that we use around these drugs, both with the providers and with, the young folks like you guys, not the chill pills, not the Xanny bars, like these are deadly. So, and pairing with folks like April and the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse, because I feel like the more we get momentum, the more there's a cultural dialogue about the dangers.
And I think that's all the questions we have for you, but thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, really helping advocate.
Okay,
and
thank you, Melissa. You reached out to me initially, and I just really thank you for that. I see some really great opportunities for NCAPDA to do more education with you right at our side. Also, again, a reminder, please hang out to those who are watching the video for the additional resources. And as this video gets posted onto our YouTube channel, which is capital NCAPDA, you will see that I will post some additional resources even beyond the end of the video that I think will get some help into the hands of people, like the Ashton Manual, a link to that, and also to a really cool website I just uncovered, Melissa. I'm not sure you know about, but they're doing some great work around this. So that will be posted as well. So please visit that, share the video with everybody that you think needs this, and that's virtually everybody. So thank you very, very much. And thank you again to Ankita and to Karthik for the great job they did in the interview today. Really appreciate our
great seeing you both.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks.
Here are a few resources we hope you'll check out. If you or a friend or family member has concerns related to substance misuse, suicide, or mental health issues of any kind, contact the anonymous 24/7 hotline at 800-662-HELP. Visit NIDA for Teens website, where fact-based information is provided that can empower you to make informed decisions about using and misusing drugs of all times. Watch the What is Naloxone video to learn more about opioids, how they affect the brain, and how an opioid overdose can be overturned with naloxone. Thank you for watching this interview. We hope you have found it helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to NCAPDA at either 925-480-7723 or info@ncapda.org. You can also join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn more. Thank you.